I thought I pulled up on my phone, but I can't pull up on my phone. That's okay. I can. No, I don't need to be next to you. It'll make too many little big boxes.
We should be live pretty soon here.
Okay. All right. Good. Well,
Does it show? Let's see there.
yeah,
Okay.
now it shows live. Okay, I think we're back. So a little past noon, but we'll give people a chance here to connect, and then we'll pray the Laudato Si prayer that Pope Francis asked us to pray here at the end of Laudato Si week. So hopefully everybody had a chance this week to reflect on Laudato Si, reflect on your particular relationship with God's creation and your role in caring for that, for all parts of God's creation. So we'll take a time here now, like Pope Francis asked every Catholic at noon, wherever they are in the world at noon, to pray the Laudato Si prayer. So I'm going to pull that up on the screen so that everybody can see. And here's the prayer. We're on the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si. So let's begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, creator of heaven and earth and all that is in them, you created us in your own image and made us stewards of all your creation. You blessed us with the sun, water, and bountiful land so that all might be nourished. Open our minds and touch our hearts so that we may attend to your gifts of creation. Help us to be conscious that our common home belongs not only to us, but to all of your creatures and to all future generations, and that it is our responsibility to preserve it. May we help each person secure the food and resources that they need, be present to those in need in these trying times, especially the poorest and most at risk of being left behind. Transform our fear and feelings of isolation into hope and fraternity so that we may experience a true conversion of the heart. Help us to show creative solidarity in addressing the consequences of this global pandemic. Make us courageous to embrace the changes that are needed in search of the common good. Now more than ever, may we feel that we are all interconnected and interdependent. Enable us to listen and respond to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. May we present suffering. May the present suffering be the birth pangs of a more fraternal and sustainable world. Under the loving gaze of Mary, help of Christians, may we make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. Well, so last week we kind of got about the theology and technical aspects of caring for God's creation. Today is a discussion about the practicalities of caring for God's creation, being gardeners, getting our hands in the dirt, and then taking the fruit of our labor and offering it to others. So Al Pavecco is here to talk to us about how to be good tomato gardeners. Al, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you share what you have and ways to help us all care for tomatoes better so we can have more bountiful harvests and be able to feed more people.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I have one question. Is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? Well, it's a fruit, but I sure wouldn't enjoy it very much if it was included in a fruit salad. But they sure are good by themselves or however you want to serve it. Uh, There are a couple of factors to consider in choosing the right type of tomato. One is the growing habit, the maturity class, and whether or not a tomato is disease resistant. In terms of growing habit, there are two types. There's a determinate type and an indeterminate type. The indeterminate takes less space to grow. It's a bushy plant, and by that I mean the plant grows to a determinate height and quits growing. It stops. The fruit ripens about the same time, not on the same day, but within a 2-week period or 3-week period, the fruit will ripen. And it's a perfect type of plant to have for making sauce for cooking, because you want your fruit to develop at the same time, so you have enough tomatoes to make a sauce. The other one is indeterminate. It takes more space. They grow tall, so it requires a sturdy support, and it grows all season long. The fruits ripen over the entire season. Talking about support, all tomatoes should be supported either by a tomato cage or a trellis, however you want to do it. There are many ways of supporting a tomato plant. Farmers in California that grow tomatoes for canning, they don't support their plants. They just let it grow on the ground because it takes a lot of work to do all the putting up cages and other means of support. But anyway, I support whether it's a determinate or indeterminate. I always use a cage. In selecting a variety, there's basically three categories of plants. There's what they call the paste, Roma, or saucing tomato. And tomatoes that fall into that category are like San Marzano, Amish paste, Roma, many different types. Then there's the beefsteak or slicing tomato that you would use for salad, sandwiches or hamburgers, salads, and varieties that come under that are like Brandywine, beefsteak, fantastic, big beef. There are many. Then there's the small fruited variety, and those are basically the cherry tomatoes. And examples of that would be Sun Gold, Sweet Million, Yellow Pear, Sun Sugar. All tomatoes could be grown in containers. All my tomatoes that I grow are in containers on my deck. But in order to have tomatoes in containers, you need containers large enough to hold at least 2 cubic feet of soil. If you've got containers that big, then feel free to grow them in containers. But if you have smaller containers, then it's best to plant them in the ground. And best type of tomatoes for containers, if you don't have a large container, would be dwarf types and the determinate types. And examples would be Bush Champion, Bush Steak, Bush Goliath, plants like that. Characteristics to look for when you're selecting a tomato at a store would be a vivid green color of the leaves and a sturdy stalk or stem, the main stem. So when do you plant tomatoes? The best time to plant tomatoes is not last week, maybe not, possibly this week, but you want the night temperatures to be in the 50s, preferably mid 50s. If it gets colder than that, it's not going to kill the plant, but the plant is going to shiver, turn purple, and not do anything. So you want to make sure that the soil temperature at the root ball, where the root's going to sit, is at least 55 degrees. And when you plant your plant, it should be at least 10 to 15 inches tall. And if it's taller than that, then there's two ways of planting a tomato, either vertically or horizontally. And I'll describe each. Vertically, if it's a plant less than 15 inches, you trim off all the branches coming off the stem and the stem and a part of the stem that goes into the ground. You don't want any of the branches left on the stem. And you trim it up to the very top, about 3/4 of the way up the plant. You just want the very top leaves left, and you plant it that deep. So you dig your hole, and about 6 inches in diameter, and in the hole, you wet the hole with water. You fill it with water, let that drain in, and then the hole should be a little bit deeper than the part of the plant that you're going to plant, because at the bottom of the hole you add I always add a thing called dolomite. Dolomite is it contains minerals, and it contains both calcium and magnesium. Now, most of the soil in our area, if you're planting it in the ground, it may have sufficient magnesium. But even if it does, I always use dolomite, and I use the powdered form. So I use about a 1/4 cup of dolomite. Quarter cup of dolomite, a 1/4 cup of bone meal, and a fertilizer. And you put that in a hole, then you cover it with either compost or more, the soil that you dug up. Put about a 1/2 inch of that on top of the amendments that you put in there, and then you could plant your plant. The other method is horizontal. If your plant is tall, above 15 inches, and you plant that deep, most likely the soil temperature that deep is going to be in the 40s, above, below 55 degrees. So then you do it horizontally. You dig a trench at an angle so that the root ball is about 6 to 8 inches below the surface of the ground. And again, you strip all of the vegetation off the stem that goes into the ground, and just let the top part, the top 1/4 of the plant lay on the ground. Put a piece of paper underneath. You don't want any of the plant touching the ground, the leaves. So just put a piece of paper or plastic. In 2 days, it's going to turn up and grow straight up. So those are the two methods for planting. Let me look at my notes here. I don't want to miss anything. Oh, also, when you trim the plant, you don't want to leave any blossoms that are on a plant. You want all the energy, the growth energy, to go towards forming a strong root system. So any blossoms that are on the plant, I know it's hard to clip, but that's the best thing you could do. You'll get plenty of tomatoes once it starts growing. Okay. So we talked about planting the plant deep, trimming everything that goes into the ground, removing the blossoms. I talked about the amendments that you would put in there. As you're filling the hole up with soil, and you want a good soil. If it's clayish, then it should be amended with compost. Just add a lot of compost to the soil where you're going to put your plant. The other thing tomatoes need is plenty of calcium. If you don't have enough calcium in your soil, then you get a condition called blossom end rot on your fruit. And the fruit is still possibly edible. It gets black and tarnished on the bottom of the tomato, but not the whole tomato will be that way, just the bottom part. So you could still eat the plant, you just cut that part off. but you don't want to have any blossom end rot. So you have to make sure that you have plenty of calcium in your soil. And you have to make sure that you water properly. Don't overwater and don't let your plant go dry. You have just, the soil has to be kept moist, not soaked with water, because the roots won't be able to breathe if there's, if it's too wet. And if you have inconsistent watering, that will cause that blossom end rot. So make sure that you water properly and that you have enough calcium in your soil. So as I'm filling up the hole, I'll fill it up about 3/4 of the way. And actually I fill it up all the way with, and then I'll put about maybe 1/4 cup of a slow release fertilizer. And the fertilizer that you use for tomatoes, that first number, which is nitrogen, should be no higher than 5. Not that tomato plants don't like nitrogen, it does. All plants like nitrogen. But if you have too much nitrogen, you'll get a big, beautiful, green, lush tomato plant with hardly any fruit. So that first number, and be sparing about using too much fertilizer. You could fertilize it maybe once or twice during the growing season, sparingly, but that's no more than that. Let's see here. Okay. I guess should talk about pruning a tomato plant. Hey, Chris, could you bring up that picture that we taught, that you showed me before? Okay, this is an example of a tomato plant, and you could see the main stem and branches coming out from the stem. Well, what starts to develop on a plant are what they call suckers, and it grows between the branch, where the branch connects to the stem, and you'll see a little green growth right there. For indeterminate plants, you want to, well, it's up to you whether or not you want to prune a tomato plant. If you let them all grow, you'll get tons of tomatoes, but they're going to be smaller fruit than if you do prune, you'll get larger fruit, and most likely the fruit will mature a little quicker. There's so much root system to a tomato plant, and if there's a lot of growth on a tomato plant, then that root system could only support so much of that growth. You could only gather so much nutrients for the plant. So the more green, the more to fruit, the fruit gets less nourishment. But if you prune it, then that nourishment will just go to what's on the plant, and you'll get larger tomatoes. Now, what I do, this is my personal belief, I allow the main stem to grow, and I'll let maybe 4 suckers to develop. And you don't start pruning suckers until the plant is at least 1 foot or 2 tall. So I prune all the suckers that are below at least 1.5 feet. Okay, then I'll allow 2 suckers to develop past that point, just 2. And as the plant grows, it'll start producing blossoms. So after the first blossoms, I let 2 more suckers develop. And after that, I trimmed all suckers past that point. Now, as your plant grows, it grows quickly, and suckers develop almost nightly. So it's best to, check your plants about every other day and trim out the suckers. And it's best to trim them in the morning, dry weather. If you do it when it's hot, it could infect the plant. It just stresses the plant. So it's best to do it in the morning when it's dry. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. Let's see. Do I need to cover here?
Al, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
You were talking about fertilizer, and you said the first number shouldn't be any higher than 5 for nitrogen. Do you have recommendations for the other numbers in the fertilizer?
The perfect ratio for tomato fertilizer is a 1-2-1. So the first number, whatever it is, the second number should be twice that, and the third number should be the same as the first number. And I use a fertilizer that's a 5-10-10 is what I use. That's a slow release. It'd be best if you could get a organic type of fertilizer, slow release organic, and you could go to your nursery, just about anywhere to get your fertilizer. There's a brand, I haven't used it yet, but I plan on using it this year, and it's called Tomato Tone, I think. I believe that's the name of the fertilizer, Tomato Tone. So I'm going to try that this year. But what I've been using has been just fine. As far as dolomite, I get mine at Lowe's. I've looked at other places and it's hard to find, but I know Lowe's carries the powdered type of dolomite. And bone meal, just any type of bone meal. Bone meal has got a lot of calcium, so it's good to use as a supplement for calcium. I'm sure there are a lot of other things that I could be talking about. There's just so much.
Sure. Al, we've got a question on Facebook for you, so you could answer this. The question is, what are your favorite tomato varieties?
Oh my God, that's not a fair question. But I'll answer it.
Uh-huh.
Okay. My favorite is it's a beefsteak. It's a hybrid. Oh, that's the other thing. There are two classes of tomatoes: hybrid, which is where they take they cross-pollinate one or two or more varieties together to come up with a tomato. And a lot of people only want heirlooms, and I don't know why, because most of the tomatoes that I like are hybrids. And thing is, if you save seeds from a hybrid plant and plant those seeds, it's not going to be the same plant as what you harvested the seeds from, because it's cross-pollination of several different varieties. The other one is heirloom and open pollinated. All heirlooms are open pollinated. So if you save seeds from an heirloom or open pollinated plant, then it will reproduce itself as the same as what you took the seeds from. My favorite beefsteaks is a tomato called Sweet Tangerine. It's a beautiful golden color, more mild tasting than a regular red tomato, but it's really a good full flavor. And it's meaty and beautiful looking and delicious. A red type, my favorite for BLTs is a tomato called Pink Berkeley Tie-Dye. It just has a right balance of acidity and sweetness, and it makes BLTs delicious. There's another variety called St. Teresa. It produces huge tomatoes, like a pound or more. And it's very meaty, very good. And there's just a lot of tomatoes. As far as cherries, everyone's favorite is either Sun Gold or Sun Sugar. It's like eating candy. Paste tomatoes. There's the best paste tomatoes for that the Italians like, that you could buy in markets and they're expensive to buy. It's a San Marzano. It's delicious for making sauces, as well as Amish paste, opalka, and striped Roman. Striped Roman, I consider it a general purpose tomato because it's not only good for cooking, it's good for everything else, salads, sandwiches, everything. It's just a wonderful tomato. And paste tomatoes are very susceptible to blossom end rot. I don't know why, but they are. I mean, blossom end rot could happen on beefsteaks too, but not as much as with paste tomatoes. So with paste tomatoes, you got to maybe give it an extra boost of calcium. I'm sure there are other things I could talk about, and I just can't come up with it.
That's okay, Al.
But if anyone has any questions about tomatoes, or if you would like me to send you a tomato planting tip guide that I created, you could email me. My email address is and it's my last name, Pavelko, P-A-V as in Victor, E-L-K-O at Comcast.net. And just put tomatoes in the subject so I know it's not junk mail. And also, Master Gardeners had a plant sale recently, and it was to other Master Gardeners. Our normal Mother's Day plant sale was canceled because of the virus. So the plants that we had grown for the sale, we didn't want to be stuck with them. So we had a little mini sale for volunteers. We have some extra tomato plants that we haven't sold, and I don't know how many there are, but if anyone would like a tomato plant, again, I'll let Ryan explain how we're going to make this arrangement for the getting tomato plants. But Ryan, if you could maybe talk about that. Oh, all these are beefsteak types. We don't have any more paste tomatoes. We're out of cherries. So all of these are beefsteak types. And the beefsteaks that we have are very, very tasty. I wouldn't pick anything that's not tasty. And we have one early variety. It's called Oregon Springs. So I failed to talk about maturity, but anything under 70 days is considered an early variety. Between 72 days to 80 days is mid-season, and above 80 days is late season.
That's a wealth of knowledge, Al. Thank you so much. And we'll turn it over to Chris. She's going to give us some additional information on gardening. And then if we've got more questions, Al, they might throw you some more questions.
Sure, I'm glad to answer them.
Great. Yeah, Chris, take it away.
Do you want to talk about how people can get tomato plants from Al?
Yeah, I think we were discussing before we went online, just you could, if you email me, David L at stjoevan.org, and just let me know, and then we can arrange to leave them in the St. Joe's garden on the work table. Chris had offered that space, so you could come, and I'll work with Al and with Chris to arrange getting your tomato plants there. Al, you said you'd just put somebody's name on it so they know which ones are theirs to grab.
Yeah, if you give me a list of names, and I'd like to know within the next week because we need to clean up our greenhouse and shut it down.
Okay. Yep. So the timeline's out there, people. If you want tomato plants, email me, and then we'll get them to you at the St. Joe's Garden.
And it's possible we may have some pepper plants. I just don't know what's left, and I don't know what kind of peppers. I'm sure a lot of them are hot.
Yeah. All right. Great, Al. Okay, Chris, take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks, David, for inviting me to join you today. It seems like I'm I have a lot more information than I have time for. So what I'm going to start with is ways that you can share all these wonderful tomatoes that you're going to grow using Al's tips and anything else from the garden. So the food system in Clark County, the emergency food system, does accept homegrown produce. So when your garden starts producing a bounty, there are several things that you can do with it. One thing is you can take it directly to the Clark County Food Bank, and you can just Google that and the address and everything will come up. They say that you just take it and leave it by the warehouse door. They're disappointed because they usually like to chat with the people who bring in produce, and they can't do that right now, but you can leave it at the door. It will be put into the emergency food system and it will get to people who need it. One resource that they have on their website is a list of the partner agencies that they work with. And again, you can go to their website, you can pull up that list, and it has a map. So you could find a partner agency, a pantry or a meal site that is closer to where you live, and you can deliver your food directly there. The one thing to keep in mind is that procedures are changing almost daily regarding these pantries and meal sites. So be sure that you call the pantry before you go and find out what their procedure is and what their hours are. Another opportunity that's available has just come on. It's called Share the Bounty, and it's a program of the Master Gardener program. Let me see. I'll read the description for you. If you've been wondering how to help your community during this difficult time, Share the Bounty may be the program for you. We are calling on home gardeners to share food from their garden to help alleviate some of the food insecurity in our community made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. To join our community of gardeners helping others, visit our website, complete the registration form, and start your garden. You'll be offered research-based garden education along the way, as well as opportunities to share your bounty. And then there's a website. David, can you pull that up?
The Master Gardener website?
Yeah, it's the one that says extension.wsu.
Yes. All right. I'll pull it up on the screen here for you. This one here?
Yeah, so there's the website at the top. You can go here and you can find the let's see, where is it? Maybe that's not the one. Can we see the website at the top again?
Yep.
We need at the end of that extension.edsu.clark.share the bounty. Okay, I'll make this available at the end.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And there's another program that Slow Food Southwest Washington and the Urban Abundance Program are making available. And that is called the Resiliency Garden Kit. And I'll read what they have to say. Slow Food Southwest Washington's mission is to inspire people to enjoy, grow, and share wholesome local food. And we envision a community that eats food that's good for them, good for the growers, and good for the planet. Urban Abundance mission is to engage neighbors in the creation, maintenance, and harvest of edible landscapes that are accessible to everyone. So when you sign up for a resiliency garden, you agree to put it in a place where it is accessible to anybody who walks by. So in your front yard or in your parking strip, the Urban Abundance Program will provide some support for you. They'll supply some compost and seeds, some hand tools if you need it, a sign, that tells what is happening in your garden, what this garden is all about. And the idea is that people can just come by and take what they need, and maybe they'll even do a little work in exchange. Maybe they'll do a little weeding in exchange. So David was just showing the sign up sheet for that, and we can make that website available to you as well.
Put it in the chat right now.
Okay, so those are 3 ways that you can share garden produce with people in the community who might need it. So what does a garden need? What do you need if you're going to grow a successful garden? Well, the main things are you need level ground, you need an area that gets sufficient sun, you need soil, good soil, or soil that can be made good, and you need a water source. And all of those things are very important to a successful garden. You want level ground so that it's easier to work with. You're not falling down a slope when you're working in your garden. Your soil doesn't wash away when you're watering, and the water has a chance to absorb into the soil and get to the roots of the plant. Most food crops need 6 to 8 hours or more of sunlight every day. There are some that need less, but in order to know what you can grow in your garden, you need to kind of observe your site, your proposed site, and make sure that it gets sufficient light. One way that you can do that is you can choose the site in your yard where you think you want to put your garden, and then outline it in some way. You could just lay some boards on the grass. You could outline it with string. You could even take a garden hose and outline the area where you think you want to put your garden, and then observe it over the course of a day. So this might be a good thing to do on a day that you're going to be home all day. Maybe check on it every hour and see at different times of the day how much sun it gets, and calculate, when it's in the sun and when it's in the shade. And if it gets 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, you're good to go. If it gets, right at 6, maybe a little less, then you're going to be a little more careful about choosing the crops that you're going to put in. And generally, it's the crops that we eat the leaves and the roots that can withstand less sunlight. So leafy crops like lettuce and spinach, arugula, kale, chard, those things can withstand a little bit less light. And root crops like carrots, beets, turnips, radishes, rutabagas, parsnips, they can also withstand a little bit less light. If you're going to be eating, as Al said, the fruit, a tomato is a fruit, so is a cucumber, so are all our squashes. The definition of a fruit being anything that has the seeds inside. The fruit crops definitely need 6 to 8, preferably more on the 8 hours of sunlight a day spectrum. As far as your water source, you want to make sure that you're placing your garden as close to the water source as you can while still getting the appropriate amount of sunlight. I can tell you from personal experience, it really is a drag to have to carry water in buckets to your garden, or to have to pull out 100 feet of hose and roll it up again when you're done. So if you can site your garden close to your water source, if you make it easy for yourself, then you'll be more likely to water appropriately and at the right times. Soil, of course, is the most important thing. Soil that is good to start with, or soil that you can make good. And as a master composter, recycler, volunteer with the county, I'm always about compost. Compost is the magic thing for your soil. Compost added to the soil will help sandy soils absorb water better. It will slow the passage of water through the soil, holding the water there so the roots have a chance to get it. Compost will help to open up clay soils. So rather than water into the clay and have the water just sit there around the roots and the roots kind of rotting and getting cold, the water is able to pass through. So whether you need better drainage or you need slower absorption, compost is the magic thing for you. Compost also increases the biodiversity in the soil. So in the soil, there are all kinds of organisms that live there. It's been said that a teaspoon of good soil can have as many as 2 billion with a B organisms living in it. Obviously, most of those are microscopic, but all those organisms in the soil are the ones that make the nutrients available to the plant roots. So a lot of times there are things, there's, organic matter or whatever in the soil, but without those organisms to continually break it down, the roots cannot absorb those nutrients. So we want to have a good variety of different kinds of organisms living in our soil. When we go to plant our garden, there's a couple of different ways that you can plant. The main one is direct seeding or transplanting. So direct seeding is just what it sounds like. You just put the seeds directly into the soil at the right time and at the right depth and at the right spacing, and then you're good to go. Transplanting means that you need to plant a little starter plant. So a plant that has either been grown in a greenhouse or that you started indoors under lights or whatever. Many of those plants are the fruiting crops. And in this area, transplanting is the only way we can grow tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and tomatillos. We need to be sure that we grow those from a little starter plant. Because of the way our climate is, because of our cool nighttime temperatures, those plants need a good head start, and buying a starter plant is the way to do that. Almost all the other crops can be direct seeded here. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. If you buy transplants for a lot of plants, it's like you get an instant garden, right? You plant your garden is bare soil in the morning, and by the afternoon you have little plants poking out, and that can be very satisfying. One of the drawbacks is often the garden centers sell starter plants that are too crowded in a little pot, and people don't know that that's too many to plant in one place, and they plant that whole pot in one place, and everything is too crowded, and nobody does well. Or you can try to separate those little plants, but then you risk damaging the very, very fragile roots. So, so those are things like spinach and kale. I see those in nursery centers all the time, and people plant those, and then they immediately go to flower because they're stressed and they think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. I have to make my flowers and my seeds before I die. And so you never get anything from them. The other thing I see a lot is things like carrots and beets, and root crops don't like to be transplanted. So never buy starts of carrots and beets, always direct seed those. Another thing that's important to think about is when you're going to plant, and Al made some really good references to temperatures. Plants are pretty much divided into two classes of plants, cool weather plants and warm weather plants. The cool weather plants are ones that can withstand cooler air temperatures. They'll also germinate in cooler soils, and they kind of tend to need less light. So those things, some of those things can be planted here as early as February. And the cool weather crops usually are planted like between February and early June. And then they can often also be planted again in late July and all the way into September in our climate here. Warm weather crops are crops that need warmer temperatures in the soil to be able to germinate and warmer air temperatures to be able to grow. Oh yeah, the cool weather crops can withstand a light frost. Warm weather crops cannot withstand any frost. They'll die if we get even a light frost. And those warm weather crops again are mostly the fruiting crops: tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, squashes, cucumbers, and beans and corn fall into that category as well. I had some resources that I was going to share, but we seem to be running out of time, and I want to allow time for questions. I do want to touch a little bit on different planting methods. So the two main ways to plant would be row planting or square foot planting. So in row planting, again, it's just like it sounds. You spread all your seeds out in a long row. You space your rows the right distance apart, and the seed packets have all that information on it. And square foot gardening, square foot planting means that you plant by the square foot. You divide your planting area with a visual grid. It could be string, it could be little slats of wood. In my case, I use old mini blind slats a lot, and you just make a grid and put it over the top of the soil so that each square is 1 square foot. And then you plant in each square the number of seeds that would be appropriate for that plant that would fit in that spot. So basically, you plant 1, 4, 9, or 16 seeds in a square, depending on how big the plant is going to get at maturity. So like carrots and radishes, you can plant 16 in a square foot. Lettuce, you can plant 4 in a square foot. Spinach, you can do 9. And then big plants like tomatoes and broccoli, they need to be 1 in a square foot, and then they need to have a square foot left in between. So the advantages of square foot gardening is you don't have any walkways. You make your garden big enough, small enough, so that you can reach to the center from both sides, and you never have to walk on the soil. So you don't need extra room for walkways. You're also not watering and weeding walkways as you would in a row garden. So you can grow a lot of vegetables in a small space. And just to give you a little example, obviously I'm partial to the square foot method. If you have a packet of carrot seeds, the carrots have, there's probably about 1,000 seeds in that packet of carrot seeds. And the packet says to spread all those seeds out in a long row, a 30-foot row, whatever. And then when they come up, then you have to go back and take out 3/4 of them so that they're spaced properly in the row, so that they're spaced 2 or 3 inches apart in the row. And right there, that's a huge waste to me. It's a waste of seeds because every single one of those seeds is a potential carrot that somebody could eat. And it's a waste of my time to plant all those seeds and then go back and have to thin them out. Also, then it says to put the next row a foot away from the first row that you planted. Well, if the seeds can be 2 or 3 inches apart in the row, why can't they be 2 or 3 inches apart in all directions? So that's where you get 16 in a square. So I think we will open it up to questions.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions. Chris, one is right on the topic that you're talking about now, specifically about in a raised bed, about how close can your vegetable plants be? How much space does each plant need? So it sounds like you addressed some of that question, but is there anything different when you're using a raised bed versus directly in the ground?
No, and you know what? There really is, I'm going to say little scientific evidence that a raised bed is any better than a flat garden. But what does matter is that you have a specified planting area and a specified walking area, so that you're never walking on your soil, so it never gets compacted, so you can reduce the amount of tilling that you have to do. So again, 1, 4, 9, or 16 per square foot, depending on how big the plant is going to get it at maturity. And again, the planting distances are usually on the back of the seed packet. So you can see if it says thin to 2 or 3 inches apart, you can put 16 in a square. If it says thin to 4 to 6 inches apart, you can put 4 in a square, and on like that.
Okay. All right, we have another question about compost. Somebody interested in starting a compost pile. Can you give some direction on how to go about doing some backyard composting?
Do you have the Master Composters? Is there a Master Composter website?
I can see if I can look it up real quick. Why
Well,
don't
I
you?
think did I send? No, I didn't send you that link. So Clark County has a Master Composter Recycler program. They offer free backyard composting workshops, which are all virtual now, and also lots of tips for starting a compost pile in your yard. Basically, when you start a compost pile, your materials, there you go. Your materials are divided, organized by, they're called green or brown. And the green materials are materials that are fresh and moist and pliable and bendable. So those would be things like food scraps or fresh yard waste or manure. The brown materials are things that are dry, brittle, crunchy, dead, and those would be things like dead leaves, shredded paper, shredded up cardboard, wood chips, those things. So basically, when you build a compost pile, you want to use layers of equal amounts by volume of green material and brown material. So that would mean if you took a 5-gallon bucket of of kitchen scraps, fruit and vegetable scraps, and put that in your bin, then you would cover that with a 5-gallon bucket of dry leaves or shredded paper. And then you'd add some water to it, and you'd keep going that way until your bin is full. You want to make sure that your compost maintains its moisture, that it's always the consistency of a wrung out sponge. So if you picked some up in your hand, you should be able to squeeze out a little bit of moisture between your fingers. What you're doing when you build a compost pile is you're really making a habitat for all those organisms, just like the organisms that live in the soil. You've got all those organisms living in your compost pile, and they're the ones that do the difficult work of breaking down all that organic material. So when you provide a habitat, you want to be sure that they have food. So that's the green and brown material. You want to make sure they have moisture, and you want to make sure they have enough air. So you can stir your compost around periodically to get more air into the compost. And depending on how much you monitor your compost, you can have compost in as little as 6 to 12 weeks, or you could have compost as slowly as 1 to 2 years if you don't. And either one is fine. It just depends on how much work you want to put into it.
All right, I'll put the link to that page in the Facebook chat as well. Okay, another question here is, any ideas on cheap or free containers for gardening?
Oh, that's really interesting. One super cheap, easy one is to use pet food bags. So dog food, big 50-pound dog food bags, or chicken feed bags, or horse feed bags. They make excellent planting containers. So you poke a few holes in them. You put some soil in, however much soil, well, you roll the bag down to the depth of the container that you need. You put some soil in it, and then you can plant your plants directly in it. It's a super cool way to grow potatoes, because when you grow potatoes, every part of the stem that is underneath the soil will continue to make new, more potatoes. That's how the potatoes are produced. So if you start with your pet food bag rolled down to about a foot deep, put some soil in, put your seed potatoes in, cover them up, and then when they grow to be about a foot tall, add some more soil or some mulch like straw and cover it up so just the top 6 inches of the plant are showing, and roll your bag up a little bit. And keep rolling your bag up and adding more mulch as your potatoes grow. And then when it's ready to harvest the potatoes, you just dump the bag out on a tarp. There's no heavy digging, and you can let the kids go at it. It's like a treasure hunt, super fun.
Yeah, that's a great tip. All right, another question on composting is, how do you keep critters out of your compost pile?
In my experience, critters are mainly attracted to smells. So if you are putting food scraps in, it's number one is it's super important to only use fruit and vegetable scraps. You want to avoid meat, dairy, and oil. They will decompose, but meat smells really, really bad when it decomposes. It gives off chemicals like cadaverine and putrescine. Those don't sound very nice. So vermin will be attracted, well, dogs too, any kind of animal will be attracted to smell. So if you're putting food waste in your compost pile, be sure that you cover that food waste well with something dry. So leaves or shredded paper, and make sure that there's none of it exposed. And in my experience, I have not had animals get into my compost, and we live right on the edge of a green space.
All right, good to know.
Also, before we finish, I have access to a very, very large supply of vegetable seeds that I am more than happy to share. They were given to me by the food bank, and I usually distribute them throughout the season. But because I'm not meeting with groups, because I'm not at school, I haven't had my usual outlets to deliver them, to distribute them. So you can email me and I will be happy to get seeds to you. My email address is familygardening, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
Okay, so we got seed resources from Chris, tomato plant, maybe a few spicy peppers from Al. Email.
I also have other gardening resources on documents that I would be happy to share. Obviously, I'm not going to have time to get to them today. So I've got some planting calendars. I've got, I don't even know what all I have, but I have several different resources. And if you're interested, you can email me and we can decide what resources would best meet your needs.
All right, wonderful. All right, Al, Chris, any final thoughts you want to share with folks before we sign off?
Well, in keeping with the Pope's direction to care for the earth, organic gardening is an excellent way to take care of the earth, and sharing the bounty of our vegetable gardens is an excellent way to take care of our brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. Al, how about you?
Well, I agree with what Chris said, but again, if you have any questions about growing tomatoes or selecting tomatoes, please contact me. I'll be glad to help. And one thing I was talking about pruning tomatoes. I failed to mention one thing, and I'm looking for it somewhere. I'm almost there. Okay. as I mentioned once, there are, two growing habits for tomatoes, the determinate and indeterminate. And when I prune indeterminate beefsteak type tomatoes, I have the main stalk and basically 4 suckers that I let develop. At the end of August, let me look at my notes here. Yeah, at the end of August, I typically top my plants. They could grow 6 feet tall.
Mhm.
And at the end of August, I top them because any fruit blossoms that develop past that point will not mature. So, and with determinants, it's best not to prune at all. The only time you would prune some branches is to make sure that there's good air circulator, that air could get through the plant easily. There's no obstruction for air. But otherwise, I would say no pruning for determinants. And cherry are typically indeterminate plants, and I do limited pruning on that. I like to get a lot of cherry tomatoes, so I don't prune those as much as I do the beefsteak types. And again, I top those at the end of August. And I stop watering my plants. If it's in the ground, I stop watering at the end of August. If it's in the pot, I stop watering the second week of September. So,
Okay. All right. Well, thank you both for your time and sharing, just a fraction of your wisdom to the community. And it's great that people have the opportunity to reach out to you and continue the conversation. And hopefully the community of St. Joe's will step up and we'll have a lot of fruits and vegetables to give to those in need around Clark County.
Great.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you all. All right. Talk to you soon.
okay, great. Thank you.
Take care.